Hi, it's Mrs. De La Paz. This year in 6th grade, every week before we start our reading, we're going to do something called Focus on Reading. And this week's Focus on Reading, because it's our first, we're reviewing all of the reading strategies you have learned in elementary school. So we're going to run through that really quickly, but don't worry if there's some you don't know as well. We'll keep practicing them this week, and then we'll keep practicing them every week with all of the stories that we read. Okay? So, these are the things that you're going to do before you even start reading the story. Okay? These are things you do before reading. We call that making a plan. So one of the things you do when you make a plan is you preview. In elementary school, they probably called that a picture walk. If you've heard picture walk, that's preview. It means you go through, you look at the pictures, you look at the headings, captions, if there's bold words, you look at those and you try and figure out what the story is going to be about. The next thing you do is you set a purpose. Good readers always know why they're reading the story. So you want to figure out what you want to learn or what you want to gain from reading this text. In the stories that we read, they will usually give you a purpose, but in the things you read on your own, you practice setting your own purpose. And the third thing we want you to do before you read is to predict. Predict means you try to guess, figure out what's going to happen next, and then while you're reading, you see if you were right or wrong. So those are all things that you do before you read the story. Then while you're reading, one of the most important things you can do is monitor. Monitor means, the word monitor means to keep track of or to check on something. So when you monitor your reading, you're making sure that you understand what you're reading. Very little kids in elementary school, they don't know if they understand or don't understand. By middle school, we want you to be able to figure out, do you really understand what you're reading, or do you only kind of understand what you're reading? That's an important thing for you to know. So, monitoring is how you do that. Monitoring means if you know that you did not understand something very well, you go back and reread it again. Or maybe you choose to read ahead a little bit and see if that helps answer your question and figure out what it was that was difficult. Another thing that happens when you're monitoring is you change the pace. You change how fast you read. So if I'm reading something that I know very well, I already know about this topic, I totally understand it, I'm probably reading faster than normal. But when I get to a part that's challenging or a part that's hard or confusing, then I'm going to stop and I'm going to slow down. I'm going to read slower. This is something that all good readers do. Even me, as an adult, when I'm reading, there's some parts of my book that I can read very fast. And there's other parts of my book that I have to slow down and read very slowly. So that's just something that good readers do. They monitor their reading. Another thing you do while you're reading is you make connections. Making connections means you put together something from the book that you're reading and something from your real life. So that can be a connection between the book and something that happened to you. It can be a connection between this book and another book or another story that you read. Or it can be a connection between this book and something that happened in the world, happened in your country, or something you learned in history class, or something in the news. Okay, all of those are making connections. Another thing that good readers do while they're reading is they visualize. Visualizing means that you use your imagination to figure out what the author is telling you. So when you get into middle school, sometimes the books do not have many pictures or they don't have any pictures. What the author does is instead of drawing the picture for you in the book, the author paints the picture with words. And you have to take the author's words and put them into a picture in your mind. That's visualizing. So we'll practice doing that this year. But one helpful way to find those words is to look for words that tell you what things look like, or what things sound like, what things smell like, what they might taste like, or what they might feel like. Those will help you get a better picture for your visualizing. Good readers also ask questions, and then they use the pictures or they use the text to try to answer those questions that they have. Sometimes when you ask a question, the answer is in one place and it's easy to find. That's called a right there question. Other times, the question is in many different places. So sometimes you need to think and search in different parts of the text. It might be in 2 or sometimes 3 different places. You have to put all of that together to get the answer to your question. Sometimes questions are about the big idea of the whole story, or other times, and these are the trickiest ones, we're going to practice these a lot this year. Other times, the questions ask you about the author's purpose or the author's point of view. So for those questions, you have to put yourself in the brain of the author. You pretend that you're the author and you figure out why they did certain things. So we'll be practicing those a lot this year in 6th grade. Another thing you do while you're reading is you determine importance. So doing that means that you figure out what the most important part, what the main idea of the story is, and you focus on that. If you've heard the word summarize before, a good way of doing this is to summarize. Summarize means you take the whole story, the really big story, and you have to put it into a very small 1 or 2 sentences only. Okay? And then you include some details to prove that those were the main ideas. Making inferences is something that can be hard for middle school kids. Inferences means you take something that it says in the book and you put it together with something that you already know. Okay? So, I put an example here so you can see. If the book says, "We are both from Mexico," that's what's in the story. I know from my life that when I meet someone else from Mexico, I know we have a lot in common. I know maybe we both speak Spanish. I usually feel more comfortable with that person because we're from the same country. So, my inference, the book says we're from Mexico. I know how I feel when I meet someone from my country. So I can figure out, my inference is that because they're both from the same country, the narrator probably feels very comfortable and feels very at home with that person. Okay? We'll keep practicing inferences during the year, but that's what an inference is taking something from the book and something from your mind and putting them together. So those are all the things you do while you're reading. Then after reading, this is something that we usually do together as a class and we practice. We synthesize. Synthesize is really difficult for teachers to explain sometimes, so I liked this definition. It said, reading is like putting together a puzzle. You put many different pieces together to form the whole of something. So when you're done reading, you take all the different pieces and different things you learned and you put them together in a new way to make a new idea. That's synthesizing. There's 3 different ways that we'll do that this year. One of them is drawing conclusions. That means you pay attention to everything you learned about the topic and then you decide what you think is true. Another one is to form generalizations. Generalizations are kind of like an inference. You take something from the story and something from your mind and you put them together. But while an inference is about one small situation, a generalization is true in many places or for many things. And then another thing we'll do a lot this year is we're going to compare. So that's where you find out how the texts are the same and how they are different. So we'll be doing that a lot. So remember, when we're reading, before you read, you're going to think about what you already know. During reading, you read a small chunk and then you stop and think about what you're reading. Many times you'll have a partner or you'll have a group so you can talk about what you're reading with your group. And then after reading, we're going to talk to a classmate and we're going to look at the big picture of the story, put things together to make our own opinions and our own ideas about things. Okay? So every good reader uses all of these strategies every time they read. It's just like everything else. If I want to be a famous soccer player, I'm not going to be a famous soccer player if I never practice. And if I want to be a good reader, if I want reading to get easier, it's not going to get easier if I don't practice. I have to practice every day, and that's how you become a better reader. So we'll be reading in class every day, and you'll be reading at home every day, and you'll be reading in your content classes every day. And in all of that reading, you're going to practice all of the strategies we just talked about. Okay? All right, you can move on to your next activity now.